Hello and welcome to Talk Thursday. Today we're sitting with CNN Beijing Bureau Chief Jaime FlorCruz, and we're going to talk about Philippine-China relations. Jimmy has been in China for a long time and one of the best experts to talk about it. Jimmy, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Rockford.
Thanks for having me.
Can we go a little bit broader here? Why this year? I mean, how did the conflict in the South China Sea escalate this year?
I don't have all the timelines figured out, but I think it's predictable. It should have been predictable that China will be tough, will take a tough stand when it comes to their territorial and sovereign claims, not just in South China Sea. It's also going on in other places, other areas like East China,
right.
The Diaoyu Islands.
Diaoyu Islands.
Yeah, and it should be predictable. If you look at China's history, the Chinese have always thought that they have this 100 years of history of having been a victim of colonial powers. So they have this what we call the 100-year syndrome. That they were punished, they were oppressed, and so whenever their claims, their territorial claims are challenged by whoever, they really push back hard. They push back hard on the U.S., on Taiwan. They push back hard on South China Sea.
But it seems like in South China Sea, again, this has been a long-term problem. Mischief Reef, China came out ahead in Mischief Reef. And then this year it just seemed like both sides escalated. On the Philippine side, what we saw was a new government and a new Secretary of Foreign Affairs really dealing with it. On China, were there issues that was going on in China that made the South China Sea in particular more of a flashpoint?
Well, this is a special year in China. It's a year of a leadership transition. China is facing a lot of problems domestically, lots of challenges. China's economy is slowing down. There's dissent is growing. Protests are reported quite often. And so domestically, the Chinese leadership is kind of on a holding pattern. They don't want any disruptions. They don't want any messy news. And whenever there is, their instinctive reaction is pushback. And sometimes issues like South China Sea could influence this domestic or their reaction to domestic politics. Also, the Chinese government in recent years managing this rising power, 1.37 billion population, has become such an economic power, number 2 biggest power in the world. At the same time, China's economy and society is changing much faster than the political reform. And so what we see is a rising power that's challenging the status quo power of the United States. And yet, I think the Chinese are still in the process of figuring out what does it mean to be a rising power, what prerogatives do you have, but also what responsibilities does a rising power have. Imagine China as like a teenager who is inside the body of a 30-year-old Hulk. So their mindset is still kind of a teenager, but they still don't, or they're still trying to figure out emotionally what it's like to be a big power in the world. And so this is playing out in such a period that they're dealing with so many problems at the same time.
Right. Is this nationalism, this fervor for nationalism, being used as a political tool to hold their support together?
I think many countries do that, and the
yes.
Chinese are not an exception.
Yes.
Nationalism, well, first, it doesn't take much prompting in China to trigger this nationalist sentiments. The Chinese are typically very patriotic, nationalistic, and so they don't need much prompting. A little bit of prompting will will make this happen. In fact, just a few days ago, the protest against the Japanese over Japan's move to buy the Diaoyu Islands.
Yeah.
Yeah, it provoked a lot of ugly protests in China, in some small cities in China, to the point that they were overturning and burning Japanese-made cars driven by policemen.
That's right. That's right.
And so it's a very tricky issue. On one hand, nationalism can be a glue that the Chinese can use to keep this country together, this huge and diverse country together. But it's also a dangerous path to take. And I think the government knows that there is a limit to encouraging such nationalistic. For example, there's one instance a few days ago when two Chinese in a car apparently overtook and blocked the car driving the Japanese ambassador, and one of them pulled down the flag that was the car was flying. Now, the good news is the Chinese government acknowledged that that was wrong and that they had punished the two. But that, to me, shows the danger of nationalism, nationalistic fervor going out of hand.
Correct. CSIS in the United States has said that South China Sea, that they considered it the world's worst flashpoint, potential flashpoint. Do you agree with this?
Possibly. I mean,
why?
we've always considered Taiwan, for example,
Correct.
as the flashpoint in the region. Why? Because the Chinese will go to war if Taiwan declares independence.
Right.
And it could potentially involve the United States because of the Taiwan Relations Act.
Right.
So we've always considered Taiwan as the flashpoint or potential flashpoint. But that now includes South China Sea and East China Sea, the Diaoyu Islands. That's my biggest worry, is any miscalculation or misunderstanding on any side could lead to a very ugly confrontation.
The level of brinksmanship seems so high this year compared to last year.
Yes.
And on both sides,
On both
the
sides.
whole thing this year started with just the ships coming into the area.
Yeah.
I guess can you take apart what both sides, the Philippines and China, can do to actually have real dialogue instead of this, to bring down the level of brinksmanship and get to some substantive issues?
Yeah, I think we should rely more on our astute diplomats to talk and discuss these issues. One kind of issue that makes it difficult is the different systems that we have. In the Philippines, we have a free press.
Right.
Everybody can speak. The president speaks about it. The defense minister speaks about it. A governor speaks about it, advocates boycott of Chinese goods. Maybe a janitor can speak about it and speak on behalf of the Filipino people, right? The Chinese can't figure out, so what is the signal that they should pick up from the Philippine side?
Right.
Because the Chinese, in their system, is a top-down system. The president doesn't speak until it's about, they're ready to go to war.
Yes, yes.
They're very calibrated. They speak in very calibrated ways.
Right.
The media is the same. I mean, they can tell their media, stop talking about it or don't talk too much about it.
Right.
They can calibrate the message.
Yes.
And it's fairly consistent. So what we have are two different systems, two different traditions.
Yes.
And peoples.
And I think even aside from the tradition, we have a president early on this year who actually speaks off the cuff. And that was one of those points of brinksmanship that happened, I think. Look at the Philippines. What has the Philippines done right? What has it done wrong?
On this issue?
On the South
well, I
China
think no doubt that the Philippines should stand by its territorial claims. It's good to defend it. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, we should. At the same time, I think that it's predictable that the Chinese will not give an inch on their claim. So what we have are two conflicting claims. And what's the solution? I think there's no better solution than through diplomacy and negotiations, and perhaps a joint exploration of the region is in the end the only positive and doable way. China will not go away,
yes,
and China will keep rising. So we're stuck with our neighbors. We can choose our wives, but we cannot choose our neighbors, right? I think in the long run, the Philippines should figure out a way to coexist with a rising power as a neighbor, and otherwise we will not have peace in our region.
Yeah.
China also, as they say, seeks a peaceful environment because they want to focus on their economic growth, right?
Yeah.
I think the Philippines should also, in the end, focus on growth and prosperity for our people. If we have an uneasy and insecure environment, then our budget will probably be going to military buildup.
Correct.
I think it's not in the people's interest to do so.
The last question on this is, what role is the United States playing in all of this?
Well, it seems to be, at least that from the Chinese point of view, there's always this U.S. behind whatever is going on in Asia, the so-called pivot of the United States back to Asia. Of course, the Chinese have always said the U.S. never really left Asia,
yes,
right? And that is the problem of either miscommunication or misunderstanding. We all, our diplomats, our policymakers, our think tank people, our scholars, should try to figure out and explain to people what's going on in this geopolitical, very fluid geopolitical situation. We need to figure out what America's role will be in Asia and how China can coexist with America, still a big player in the region. As Hillary Clinton said, Pacific is big enough for two big countries to exist. And the Philippines, as one of the countries in this region, I think we should also try to figure out where we fit in this geopolitical map.
Do you see this kind of work being done diplomatically? I mean, is it becoming, is the public debate reflecting what needs to happen?
I think there is a gap between the public discussions and the diplomatic efforts that need to still be made. I have trust in the wisdom of our diplomats on both sides, and that I think if we stick with a strategy, let's all go back to reading Sun Tzu's Art of War, and that's probably the best way to prevent any messy confrontation. I really hope so.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you, Jimmy. I like the description of China as a 17-year-old in a 30-year-old man's body. And Jaime FlorCruz, CNN's Beijing bureau chief, talking about the South China Sea and the changing geopolitical dynamics of growing China, of a fast economic power, and the United States, with the Philippines caught in between. This is Talk Thursday. I'm Maria Ressa. Please continue the conversations on Twitter, send your questions on Facebook, and Jimmy is in town for a little while. We'll try to get him to answer them for you. Join us again. Bye-bye.